They told me I had 3 days left. Not weeks, not we'll see. 3 days like my life had been reduced to a calendar reminder. I didn't cry. I didn't bargain. I just lay there under fluorescent lights, listening to the monitor beep like it was counting down for me. My son, Ryan, stood at my bedside with his hand wrapped around mine. Warm palm, clean nails, no tremble. He squeezed gently like a loving son should. Then he leaned in close enough that anyone watching would have thought he was whispering a prayer. But what he whispered wasn't love. It was relief. "Only 3 days," he said, smiling in a way that didn't belong in a hospital room. Then everything finally changes. I stared at the ceiling tiles and felt something inside me turn cold and clear. Because in that smile, I understood the truth. The floor wasn't collapsing beneath my life. It was collapsing beneath my family. And when Ryan walked out of that room, still wearing the face of a grieving son, I reached for my phone with a hand that finally stopped shaking. I made one call, and I set a trap so quiet, he wouldn't even hear it close. The moment your child starts hearing your death like a payday, love becomes a liability. The doctor said the words carefully, like he was afraid they might explode in my face. Stage 4, aggressive. We've run out of realistic options. I nodded the way I'd nodded across conference tables for 40 years, steady, controlled, unreadable. I'd built my life on not letting people see the crack until after the deal was done. But inside, something did crack. Not fear of dying. Something worse. Because while the doctor explained timelines and comfort plans, I kept watching my son's eyes. Ryan wasn't looking at me. He was watching the doctor's mouth like he was timing each word. When the doctor finally paused and asked if we had any questions, Ryan didn't ask about pain. Didn't ask what my last days would look like. He asked, "How fast does it usually progress once it gets to this stage?" Usually, like he'd already decided my death belonged to a category. The doctor answered in measured tones. "It varies, but given your father's markers, I'd estimate days to a week, possibly less." Days. A week. I felt Ryan's hand tighten around the back of the chair he was standing behind. Not in panic, more like someone bracing before a long-awaited wave hits shore. Then he exhaled. Quiet. Almost satisfied. I told myself I was imagining it. Grief does strange things. People get awkward. People say the wrong thing. But as we stood to leave, Ryan thanked the doctor too quickly, already turning his body toward the door like he'd been handed a schedule and was eager to start working it. In the hallway, the air smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. A nurse pushed a cart past us, squeaky wheels echoing. Somewhere down the corridor, a baby cried sharp and alive, and the sound made me feel older than I'd ever felt. Ryan walked beside me in silence. Not the heavy silence you expect after bad news. The organized kind. The kind where someone is rearranging the future in their head. Outside, the parking lot was washed in late afternoon light. My car sat under a palm tree, windshield glittering with heat. Ryan reached it first and held my door open, polite, practiced, like an employee escorting a client. As I lowered myself into the passenger seat, he asked it casual as a weather comment. "So, have you looked at your estate recently?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, trying to find embarrassment on his face. Regret. Anything that would tell me he didn't mean what it sounded like. He kept his eyes forward, hand on the wheel, the other tapping lightly on the console. Tap, tap, tap. Like he was counting something only he could see. "Just thinking practically," he added. "You know, planning ahead." Planning. I had built my life on planning, on turning chaos into numbers that behaved, on taking risk and making it pay. But hearing my son talk about my death like a checklist, it didn't feel practical. It felt like I'd already been converted from a person into an account. Back at home, Ryan followed me through the house like he'd never noticed it before. His gaze snagged on details, things he'd ignored for years. The locked study door. The small wall safe tucked behind a framed photograph. The filing cabinet I kept organized down to color-coded tabs. "You should simplify," he said lightly, fingers brushing the edge of my desk. "Less stress for everyone." Everyone. That word had teeth. That night, after Ryan left, the house felt too quiet. The air conditioner hummed. A ceiling fan spun lazily above my bed. I lay there staring at the shadows on the ceiling and replayed the day in my head. Not the diagnosis. Ryan's question. Ryan's tapping fingers. Ryan's smile. And the thought that slipped in slow, unwelcome, impossible to ignore, didn't terrify me because it was dramatic. It terrified me because it was logical. What if my time wasn't simply running out? What if someone was waiting for it to end? I reached for the nightstand and picked up my phone, thumb hovering over one contact I trusted more than most people in my own family. Claire Morgan. She'd worked for me 22 years. She knew my routines better than my son did. She'd never asked me for anything except clarity. I didn't call her yet, not because I wasn't scared, because fear makes you rush, and rushing makes you sloppy. I set the phone down, staring at it like it might ring with the answer. In my head, one question kept looping tight and sharp. If Ryan was already counting my days, what, exactly, had he been doing while I wasn't looking? Denial doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks quietly, until you're standing on pieces you can't ignore anymore. The first person to notice something was wrong wasn't a doctor. It was Claire. She came into my study that evening without knocking, which was unusual for her. Claire had always respected doors, physical and otherwise. When she closed it behind her, gently but firmly, I knew this wasn't about schedules or contracts. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands weren't. "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Years of negotiations had taught me that the first person to react emotionally usually lost. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the window like she was checking for witnesses. Then she asked the question that landed heavier than the diagnosis itself. "Did Ryan seem relieved today?" Relieved. I almost laughed. Almost. I told her what I'd told myself all afternoon, that grief makes people awkward, that everyone processes bad news differently. I even smiled, like that might convince both of us. Claire didn't sit down. She never sat when she was nervous. "There's more," she said quietly. "Last week, when you were at the hospital for tests, Ryan was in your office, on the phone." My shoulders tightened, just a fraction. "I wasn't trying to listen," she continued, "but he wasn't being subtle. He said, 'We need to adjust the timing. He's lasting longer than expected.'" The room felt smaller, like the walls had taken a step closer. "Timing of what?" I asked, already knowing the answer I didn't want. She swallowed. "That's what scared me." Claire had no reason to lie. No inheritance. No angle. She'd stayed with me through bankrupt partners, hostile takeovers, and one very ugly divorce, without ever asking for more than honesty. When she left, the house felt hollow. I sat alone in the dark for a long time, the city lights bleeding through the windows, replaying her words over and over. "Lasting longer than expected." That wasn't something you said about someone you loved. That was something you said about a plan. Later that night, I stood in my bathroom staring at the small orange prescription bottle in my hand. Same label, same dosage, same refill schedule I'd followed for months. Still, something felt wrong. I poured the pills into my palm and studied them under the light. One capsule looked sharper, the edges slightly different, a detail so small you'd miss it unless fear had already taught you how to look. I told myself I was being paranoid. Sickness makes men suspicious. Fathers shouldn't doubt their sons over a feeling. But paranoia doesn't make you open your phone and scroll through old photos, pictures I'd taken months ago when the prescription was first filled, back when documenting everything was still just a habit, not a survival skill. Side by side, the difference was undeniable. My chest tightened not with fear of dying, but with something heavier. Grief. Because if I was right, this wasn't about illness anymore. It was about intent. I placed the bottle back on the counter, hands steady despite my racing heart, and made a decision I never imagined I'd have to make. I would stop assuming the best, and I would start looking for the truth, no matter who it pointed to. That was the night love stopped feeling like protection, and started feeling like a blindfold. The moment you suspect your child might be hurting you, confrontation stops being courage and becomes a mistake. I didn't say anything to Ryan. Not that night, not the next morning, not even when he brought me breakfast and set my pills beside the coffee cup like he was doing me a favor. Confrontation would have been easy, emotional, satisfying for about 10 seconds, and then it would have ruined everything. Because if Ryan was involved, accusing him would do exactly what guilt always does. When it feels threatened, it would adapt. Whatever was happening would move deeper into the dark, out of reach. So instead, I did something colder. I stopped taking the pills, quietly, without announcement, without witnesses. I flushed them one by one, listening to the water swallow them like secrets. Within days, something changed. The nausea eased. The constant fog behind my eyes lifted just enough to make one thing terrifyingly clear. My body wasn't failing the way it was supposed to, which meant the cancer wasn't winning as fast as the doctors expected. Something else had been helping it. I scheduled a private appointment with my physician and brought the bottle with me. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I just said, "Test these," and compare my blood work to last month. When he came back with the results, he closed the door behind him. "There's a compound here that doesn't belong," he said carefully. "Long-term exposure would accelerate liver failure." He didn't say the word poison. He didn't need to. That was the moment my role changed. I wasn't a dying father anymore. I was a man buying time just long enough to let the truth feel safe enough to speak. Pretending to be weaker than you are is the most dangerous advantage a man can have. Once I knew, I committed. I let my posture slump, let my voice thin. I missed meals when Ryan was around, and made sure he noticed. When he asked how I was feeling, I gave him exactly what he needed, just enough hope to stay careless. Tired, I'd say. More than yesterday. His concern never reached his eyes. What reached them was confirmation. Behind the scenes, I made quiet adjustments. Claire rerouted my real medication to her apartment. We changed pharmacy records. We documented everything: dates, refills, pill counts, like this was a hostile takeover instead of a family implosion. Ryan started visiting more often. He brought soup I didn't eat, vitamins I pretended to take. He hovered in the doorway of my bedroom, watching my chest rise and fall like he was checking an investment. One afternoon, he stood a little too long at the foot of my bed. "You should rest," he said. "Stress won't help now." No. That word again, like the end had already been scheduled. That night, alone, I practiced breathing shallow in front of the mirror, counted seconds between blinks, learned how to look fragile without being reckless. Because the plan wasn't to survive quietly. It was to let Ryan believe he was winning. And people only reveal the truth when they think the ending is already written. The most revealing conversations happen when people believe you can't hear them anymore. The collapse was timed for a Thursday night. Hospitals changed shifts then. New faces. Lower suspicion. Claire knew the rhythm better than anyone. She'd helped manage crises long before this one had a heartbeat. I practiced the fall like an actor rehearsing a final scene. Where to land. How to let my body go slack without hitting my head. How to bite my tongue just enough to taste blood, convincing, not dangerous. When it happened, Claire's scream was real. That part hurt more than I expected. Sirens arrived fast. Lights painted the walls red and blue like my life was already being erased. In the ambulance, I kept my eyes half closed, breathing shallow, counting the bumps in the road like milestones. At the hospital, words flew past me. Organ failure, hours to days. Prepare yourselves, delivered with the calm efficiency of people who thought this story was almost over. Ryan arrived 20 minutes later. He rushed in, breathless, eyes wide, playing the role perfectly. He took my hand, leaned close, and said loudly enough for the nurses to hear, "Please hang on, Dad." But when they turned away, his face changed. Not fear, not grief, calculation. That night, long after visiting hours ended, I waited. Because men like my son always come back. When they think no one is listening, people tell the truth when they believe time has already chosen a side. The room was dim when Ryan came back. No nurse, no audience, just the soft hum of machines and the steady beep that told him I was still technically alive, barely. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, measuring. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing shallow, my body perfectly still. I let the silence do the work. Then he stepped closer. He checked the monitor first. Heart rate, oxygen. Numbers that meant nothing to him beyond confirmation. When he finally took my hand, his grip was firm. Too firm for comfort. Too deliberate for love. He leaned down until his mouth was near my ear. "Finally," he whispered. The word was soft. "Satisfied." 3 days, he continued, almost to himself. "I've waited my whole life for this." There was no anger in his voice. No hesitation. Just relief, the kind that comes when a problem is about to solve itself. I felt something detach inside me. Clean. Permanent. In that moment, I stopped being his father. I became evidence. The recorder, hidden in the tissue box, caught every syllable. The camera tucked into the vent caught his smile when he straightened up. Ryan squeezed my hand once more, then let go like a man closing a file he no longer needed. When the door clicked shut, I opened my eyes. I didn't cry. I reached for my phone. It was time to turn the truth into something he couldn't outrun. Once the truth is recorded, time stops being your enemy and starts working for you. By midnight, my hospital room no longer felt like a place where people came to die. It felt like an office. The lights were low, but my mind was sharp, sharper than it had been in weeks. I made the call with steady hands, reciting a number I'd memorized years ago and never expected to use like this. My attorney arrived first, tie loosened, eyes alert, asking questions without wasting time. Behind him came a notary and an independent physician, both strangers by design. No favors, no familiarity, just process. They tested me carefully. Name, date, location, current president. I answered without hesitation. The physician nodded, writing slowly. Patient is fully oriented, competent to execute legal documents. That sentence mattered more than anything Ryan had planned. When my attorney asked what I wanted, I didn't pause. Everything goes to Claire, I said. Silence. And my son? He asked. $1, I replied. And a sealed letter. Keys clicked. Pages printed. The notary watched every signature like a hawk. At 1:19 a.m., the stamp came down with a soft, final thud. In that moment, my legacy stopped being vulnerable. Whatever happened next, whatever Ryan tried, he could still hurt me, but he could never take what I built. The world doesn't pause when you die, it just starts sorting what you left behind. Morning came quietly. The machines were disconnected one by one, each click sounding louder than it should have. The doctor stood at the foot of the bed and said the words people practice saying but never expect to hear directed at someone they just spoke to hours earlier. Time of death. A clipboard. A signature. A cause that fit neatly into a box. I kept my eyes closed as they rehearsed grief around me. Nurses moved with respectful efficiency. Curtains were drawn. The room felt lighter, emptier, like my presence had already been edited out. Ryan arrived 20 minutes later. He collapsed into the chair beside the bed, hands covering his face. His shoulders shook at the right moments. Anyone watching would have sworn they were witnessing a son undone by loss. But grief has weight. This felt staged. When the nurse told him it was time, Ryan stood too quickly. He wiped his eyes once, checked his phone, and nodded like a man already late for his next appointment. As they wheeled my body out, I caught one last glimpse of him typing, thumb moving fast, future already updating itself. In a service corridor no one ever notices, I was transferred under a different name. No announcement, no ceremony. That was the moment my public life ended, and Ryan believed he'd finally won. Funerals don't reveal who loved you, they reveal who was waiting. The service was held 3 days later. Clean chapel, neutral colors, soft music chosen by people who didn't really know me. Business partners filled the front rows, murmuring about markets and timelines as if death were just another disruption to manage. Ryan stood at the podium in a black suit that fit him perfectly. Too perfectly. He spoke about discipline, about legacy, about how I'd taught him everything he knew. His voice cracked at the right moments. He paused when the room expected him to. He even dabbed at his eyes once, careful, controlled. People nodded. Some cried. I watched the live stream from a quiet apartment across the city, my name already etched into stone somewhere I'd never visit. Claire sat beside me, hands folded tight in her lap. That was convincing, she said softly. It was polished, I replied. There's a difference. When the camera panned to the casket, Ryan glanced at it briefly. Not with sorrow, with calculation, like a man mentally closing a chapter and opening the next ledger. Meetings, calls, signatures, life reorganizing itself now that the obstacle was gone. That's when I understood something with absolute clarity. Some people don't mourn death. They mourn delay. As the service ended, Ryan hugged strangers and accepted condolences, already moving forward. And I knew quietly, certainly, he was about to make his next mistake. The moment money chooses a side, love stops pretending. The reading of the will took place in a quiet conference room downtown. No flowers, no speeches, just a long table, a legal pad, and people pretending this was routine. Ryan arrived early. Black suit, red eyes, grief pressed flat and ironed smooth. He nodded politely at the attorney, at Claire, at the strangers in the room who had already stopped mattering to him. He sat forward in his chair. Ready. The attorney cleared his throat and began with formalities, names, dates, clauses designed to slow a moment everyone was racing toward. Ryan's leg bounced beneath the table, impatience leaking through the performance. Then came the sentence that froze the air. To my son, Ryan Miller, I leave the sum of $1. Ryan laughed once. Sharp. Uncontrolled. That's not funny, he said. Read the real one. The attorney didn't look up. The remainder of the estate, he continued, including all assets and holdings, is bequeathed to Claire Morgan. The room went silent. Ryan stood so fast his chair scraped backward. This is fraud, he snapped. He wasn't thinking straight. Documents slid across the table, medical certification, timestamps, witnesses. A wall he hadn't seen coming. Ryan's face didn't show grief. It showed entitlement turning into anger. And as he stormed out, he looked back at Claire with a stare that promised this wasn't over. He was right. It wasn't. Desperation doesn't announce itself. It watches, waits, and chooses the moment you're alone. Ryan disappeared after the will reading. No calls, no public outrage, no lawsuit filed. That worried me more than shouting ever could. Men like my son didn't retreat when they lost. They recalculated. Claire noticed it first. A black sedan parked across from her building twice in 1 week. Missed calls from private numbers. Flowers left at her office, with no card. No name. He wants something, she said quietly when she told me. He already lost everything, I replied. That's why he's dangerous now. 3 nights later, Ryan finally made his move. Not through lawyers. Not through the press. He waited outside Claire's office as the sun went down, blocking her path with the same confident smile I'd seen my whole life. You don't deserve any of it, he told her calmly. You know that, right? That wasn't grief speaking. That was entitlement trying to survive. When entitlement feels cornered, it stops asking and starts demanding. Ryan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The parking lot was nearly empty, the concrete still warm from the day. Claire tried to step around him, but he moved with her, matching her pace like this was a dance he'd rehearsed. Just sign it back, he said, holding out a folder. We can end this quietly. Claire's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. That's when his smile disappeared. What he thought he was doing, Ryan replied, stepping closer, was stealing from his own son. The word stealing told me everything. In his mind, nothing had changed. The money was still his temporarily misplaced. When Claire shook her head, Ryan's tone hardened. You don't want this to get complicated. He glanced around the empty lot, then back at her. That wasn't a threat. It was an assumption. And assumptions are where men like my son make their final mistakes. Lies don't collapse all at once. They fall apart. The second light hits them from the wrong angle. Ryan raised the pen. That was the moment everything shifted. Floodlights snapped on without warning, bleaching the parking lot white. Radios crackled. Voices cut through the air, sharp, practiced, final. Federal agents, don't move. Ryan froze mid-step. The folder slipped from his hand and hit the concrete with a sound that felt louder than it should have. He turned slowly, confusion flashing across his face just before recognition set in. Because standing behind them alive, unhurried, undeniable, was me. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You're dead, he whispered. You were wrong, I said calmly, about a lot of things. An agent held up a tablet and pressed play. Ryan's own voice filled the lot. Only 3 days. Everything's mine. That was the sound of the story ending, and the sound of consequences beginning. Court doesn't care who you loved. It only cares what you chose to do. The trial began 2 months later. No cameras, no spectacle. Just fluorescent lights, hard benches, and 12 strangers who didn't know our history and didn't need to. Ryan sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit him. He avoided my eyes not from shame, but calculation, like he was still searching for an angle. The prosecution didn't rush. They didn't have to. Medical reports came first, then pharmacy records, then messages discussing timing and dosage. Brick by brick, the story built itself without emotion. When they played the recording, the room changed. Only 3 days, everything's mine. Ryan's attorney tried to explain it away. Stress, dark humor, misinterpretation. But timestamps don't lie. When I testified, I didn't accuse. I just told the truth. And the jury stopped looking at me and started looking at him. Closure doesn't arrive with relief. It arrives when waiting finally ends. The verdict came the next morning. Guilty. On every count that mattered. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He read the sentence like a fact that had been true long before anyone entered the room. 30 years. No parole. Ryan stood when told. For the first time, he looked smaller, not broken, but exposed. like someone who had spent his life believing rules were flexible, only to discover gravity applies to everyone. When the deputies moved in, metal cuffs clicked shut around wrists that once signed checks without looking at totals. Ryan turned and looked at me. I searched his face for anger, for hatred, for blame. What I found was worse: confusion. The look of a man trying to replay his life and locate the exact moment everything went wrong. But that moment wasn't recent. It was the first time he chose entitlement over character. And this was simply the bill coming due. Surviving doesn't mean you get your old life back, it means you choose what the rest of it is for. After the sentencing, I stayed dead. Publicly, legally, intentionally. My name stopped appearing on documents. The phone that once rang nonstop sat silent on the kitchen counter, collecting dust. At first, the quiet felt like punishment, like I'd been erased from a world I built with my own hands. Then it started to feel like relief. Claire handled what still needed decisions. Trusts were restructured. Assets moved quietly, without announcements or plaques. That mattered. This wasn't about being remembered. It was about making sure the money never became a weapon again. We started with medical grants. Cancer treatments first. Always first. Anonymous checks sent to hospitals and families who were already drowning before illness finished the job. No ceremonies, no press releases. Just help arriving where it was needed. One afternoon, Claire read from a short list. A single mother approved for chemo. A retired teacher accepted into a trial. 2 kids who wouldn't lose their home while their father fought for time. I listened without speaking. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't counting days. I was counting lives that kept going. And that felt like a better use of time than anything I'd done before. The strangest thing about justice is that it doesn't fill the space betrayal leaves behind. The foundation grew quietly. No press, no announcements, just phone calls that started with hesitation and ended with relief. Social workers, hospital administrators, families who didn't know my name and didn't need to. Claire handled the logistics. I handled the decisions. Every request forced the same question: does this help someone keep going? If the answer was yes, it moved forward. If not, it stopped there. Money had finally become simple. No leverage, no ego, no conditions attached. One evening, Claire brought me a folded report and left it on the table without comment. 83 patients so far, she said. 5 in remission. She didn't smile. Neither did I. Because this wasn't victory. It was correction. If you're still listening right now, past the betrayal, past the courtroom, you've probably noticed the shift too. This story stopped being about revenge a while ago. It became about responsibility, about deciding what should exist in the world after the damage is done. For the first time in months, I slept without replaying the past. Not because I'd forgiven anything, but because nothing was chasing me anymore. Some letters aren't meant to be answered, they're meant to show you how far you've already moved on. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. No return address. Prison stamp in the corner. Handwriting I recognized immediately, even though it had changed smaller, uneven, like the writer was finally unsure of himself. Claire set it on the table and walked away without a word. I stared at the envelope longer than I expected to. Part of me wanted to open it right away, hungry for something I could name remorse, regret, an apology that sounded real. Another part already knew what was inside. An explanation, a justification, a version of the story where he was still the victim. When I finally opened it, the sentences were short and careful. He said he hadn't meant it, said pressure had changed him, said he was still my son. There was no apology that didn't circle back to him. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. Anger means you're still negotiating with the past, and I was done negotiating. I wrote back once, not to punish him, not to comfort him, just to tell the truth. You didn't lose the money, I wrote. You lost the version of yourself you thought you were entitled to be. I mailed it the same day. That night, I slept without dreams. When time stops threatening you, it finally tells the truth about what matters. My strength faded gradually, not dramatically, not all at once. Some mornings I woke up clear-headed, watching sunlight crawl across the wall like it had nowhere better to be. Other days, getting out of bed felt like negotiating with gravity itself. The doctor was honest. Months, he said. Not many. I nodded. Fear needs unfinished business to survive. I didn't have any left. I stopped planning, stopped preparing for outcomes. The urgency that once ruled every decision simply dissolved. Money no longer felt like leverage. It felt like a tool I'd finally used correctly. At night, I sometimes thought about the boy Ryan used to be, the version of him that laughed easily, that still believed effort mattered. I let those thoughts pass without chasing them. Some questions don't heal you. They just reopen doors that were locked for a reason. Claire visited twice a week. We talked about small things, weather, tides, patients doing a little better than expected. The world kept moving, and for once, I didn't feel the need to chase it. I wasn't counting down anymore. I was just living what was left. And for the first time since the diagnosis, that felt like enough. Peace doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in when nothing is left to prove. Most evenings, I sit by the window and watch the light fade without naming it progress. The room stays quiet. No meetings waiting, no calls demanding decisions. Just the slow rhythm of breath and time moving the way it always should have. I don't think about money anymore, not as power, not as leverage. It did what it needed to do, and then it became something simpler: help, passed along without my name attached. I think about limits now, about how love isn't endless giving and how clarity can be a final act of care. My son believed legacy was something owed to him. I learned too late that legacy is something you protect the world from when you're gone. If this story stayed with you, let it be for that reason, not the betrayal, not the courtroom, but the quiet decision to stop funding someone else's darkness. Some endings don't feel like victory. They feel like standing still and finally being at peace. If you're the kind of person who stays for stories like this, you'll find more waiting for you here.